we have the microphones. The floor is yours, ladies and gentlemen. So let's start with...
Thank you very much. We really thank you for spending this time with us. And I would have two questions. One, the first one is, have we seen, or do you think that there is a relationship between a successful corporate governance and the environment? I think of the government, not necessarily Mr. Donald or the Greek government, but any government, the rules around which we are surrounded when functioning within a corporation. This is the first question. And the second, I was reading very recently the interview of a very well-known economist, Nobelist, guessing that within the next probably 20 years we cannot exclude that we would have a robot taking the Nobel Prize. And how does that relate with the fact that yes, talent is a very important element in building up together a team? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take a round.
I'm willing maybe to take one question, which is the environment issue. So I already said quality of governance is very much on the ownership environment. So you can classify, owners. In that sense, private equity is increasingly regarded as inducing better governance than the public markets, because the public markets have no owners. So I think then secondly is we do know there are some countries that have just bad governance. And I would say two things. First, this is on average. So even in bad governance countries, you have good governance companies. And I would say it gives more of a premium. So the worse the environment, the more there is a premium for good governance. This you see in emerging markets, in sort of low governance countries. Japan is known to be a country that has very poor governance. I would argue France doesn't have great governance because of the state. Every time you get close to the state, you're in trouble. So basically in terms of governance. So yes, environment matters very much. And I think that's the point I wanted to say. So it's not just the board. It's, who appoints the board, what are the expectations, what's the governance culture in the country? What is the governance culture of the owners? And there, I think we had a splendid example.
I have nothing to say about robots. No. But I would like to basically just second Ludo here and say that obviously I have practiced as an independent non-executive director in our country. The governance and institutions of our country you know very well. And I can tell you that I have found splendid functioning of corporate governance in more cases than I actually thought I would. And I've also found bad outcomes from the practice of corporate governance. So the external environment is extremely important on many things, development, economics, and so on. But it's not a disabling environment for corporate governance and good functioning of a corporation. I think our country is a good example for that.
Thank you. Mr. Petropoulos?
We just ignore the environment. It doesn't, it's not relevant for us. We just do our job, and the environment has been irrelevant. As to robots, I'm not sure I understood the question, but if you mean that robot technology will develop to such an extent that talent will be irrelevant, if that's what you mean, You know, I have to share with you that, contrary to my friend Ludo here, I distrust talent. Because if you rely for your success on talent, there's a big risk. How do you replace talent? So in our company, we avoid prima donnas. We don't like prima donnas. We don't like, you know, superb, luminous managers. We don't. We like average people who are doing an extraordinary job. Ordinary people doing an extraordinary job. And this, I think, we see our job as management is to provide the environment in which ordinary people will do, and they do, I assure you, extraordinary things.
Thank you.
I will rebut a little bit, which is Mr. Petropoulos doesn't know the talent he has. Most people don't know the talent they have, and everybody has talents. We just don't know which talents we have. So we need to, you know, give environments where people can reveal their talents. But I think extraordinary things are done by extraordinary people, and I think extraordinary people have some extraordinary talents, but they don't have all the talents. So, and I think I said talent and governance competence, and the key governance competence and values, key governance competence is humility. And I think that's a value, but I love to have people that are talented and have governance competence, which is they can collaborate and they're humble. So we don't have to agree on this, but I would say a difference is made through talent. Competence gives you the bar; it doesn't give you the edge in terms of.
Thank you.
But we don't have to agree. But I think we're probably closer than we think.
I think so.
Yes, please.
Hi. Thank you so much for this. Some amazing presentations about good governance. I'm quite of a geek about it. I just wanted to ask basically because I was surprised that all three of you basically focused on the human factor, which is really interesting if you think that governance sometimes seems a little bit more bureaucratic. At the same time, what I keep as a takeaway is that the relativity of governance, that one size doesn't fit all. This is really important. But the thing that puzzles me is, as Mr. Petropoulos put it, was like that you said constitutional monarchy, if I'm not mistaken. And it's funny that, is it maybe like sometimes this hierarchy really far away from consumers, from employees and stuff? And the Germany example is really interesting. So my key question here is like, how can we bring this feedback up to the board? Because I'm sure that a lot of people here would have an amazing idea, but they know that they could never get there. They could never give this feedback to the board. So my question to the three of you is that, is there any company, or from experience, did like a consumer or an employee change the game? Were they part of it? Because you're afraid that I'm finishing, sorry for taking a little bit too long, but when you said, Mr. Luder, that people are frustrated and motivation goes down when it comes to the board and the CEOs, imagine what happens when you're an employee down, and you do not have the freedom to participate in it. That's my question. Thank you.
Could you, I'm not sure I understood your question, sir. Could you please just phrase it in one sentence?
Has
This is
it...
a good governance competence.
Yeah, I know.
I speak in paragraphs.
So it's too much to say in a few times. So my question is, do you think that employees and consumer are part of the decision making? And if this has ever like provided any amazing value for you?
Okay. The institution of the POC has made our employees a very critical part of the decision making. And I'll tell you why. Usually, the first people to catch a problem are the people on the front line. It takes some time for the problem to reach up the hierarchy. By listening to these people and giving them the opportunity to speak freely, and then doing something about whatever they say, we catch a lot of problems before they become explosive or difficult to manage. So with our system, the POC system assures exactly that. And the people, because, the trust has been built. What does it mean? Trust is, I do what I promise. Not one PIP, we call them PIP, possible improvement point, not problems. One not PIP has been left undealt with, and it's dealt in the proper way. We form a team, a special team, to deal with that problem, and that problem, that team has to report back to the POC to find out if it's, and if, when we form a team, we have three criteria. The team must have the authority, the power, and the knowledge to solve that problem. Very often, that team may include the CEO. He will serve in the team. So people know that if they come up with a problem, they identify a problem, it will be dealt with. It will not be allowed to drop on the floor. And that is enormous, I think, for the morale of the people, because they know they make a difference. That when I hear, when I go into a company and I hear, I say, look, this is wrong. Why do you do that? When I hear an employee saying, I don't know, sir, tell it to my superiors, I know it's a bad company. Good companies are, I have found this through my 70+ years of experience. Good companies, you can tell very quickly, after walking around a bit in a good company, you get to know, to understand that the employees behave as if they are owners. This is an unmistakable sign that you are in a very strong company. I don't know if I answered your question.
So this is, I think, important. I would say 2 points. KPIs. How many products came from, employees? Did we have to buy the intellectual property, or did they come bottom up? So I think this is a KPI that I think the board should look at. I think the board is not responsible for the ideas, but the board is responsible for the system that creates the ideas. So I think the board should monitor, how much innovation there is. As we know, for example, Google Fifth Day. Google Fifth Day is that on the fifth day you can do whatever you want at Google, but you have to explain, I think what I'm understanding, you have to explain what you did with it, and at some point you have to say, what did you do with the 5 days? But actually that's a carbon copy of a system that existed in 3M, but it became more popular when it was Google Fifth Day than 3M. But 3M was a very innovative company, and basically everybody had 20% of their time budget on innovation. So that's part of the governance system in terms of gouvernao, the Greek, which is setting the direction for the future. So one shouldn't think only that the board, for me the board is the control tower, but it's not the whole determination of the future. Everybody contributes to the future direction, and innovation, of course, is very important. Do we create new business units? Do we create new products? Who did that? Or is it very bureaucratized, that you can't be a manager of a new product? Yeah.
I'd like very much to ask you, because I also took a note about
excuse me. I would like very much to ask you a little bit more about... Sorry?
It's better.
It's better? Okay. Yeah, I would like to ask you a little bit more if you would like to elaborate on the KPIs, because I noticed in your presentation that you made a big distinction of just having it as a controlling item instead of having it as boosting the creativity item and the performance overall. If you would like just simply to elaborate a little bit more about that one.
Is the question to me?
Yeah, for you, for Mr. Ludo.
I think the best example, which is, for me, changing KPIs should be regarded as innovation. It's certainly change, because you change the KPIs matter. People pay attention to them, it changes behavior. So changing KPIs is change. And changing KPIs in a better direction should be regarded as value-creating innovation. And I think that's what the board does. But I think the best example was Mr. Petropoulos. So, you know, when you start moving from profit as the KPI, which is, you know, bigger companies will generate bigger profits. So if you have a KPI which is profit, you're going to grow by acquisition and you're going to do it fast. If you look at EVA, economic value added, then it's profit minus the cost of capital. So to buy, I need to invest in the capital. So actually, you're going to be much more careful, and some of the investments will not make it because you went through the EVA. So what is the set of measures you pay attention to? Okay, that's very, very important. For example, most of the time, we haven't had enough in business measures on pollution. You could release garbage in the ocean, you could release the Volkswagen emissions. You know, people are killed by the emissions, but if Volkswagen had to pay for the debts they produce, of course they would be more careful. So the choice of KPIs is, I think, fundamental to business leadership and business supervision. And I think the first question is, do we have the right set of KPIs? At some point, BP went to business simplification. Business simplification meant we're reducing the number of KPIs. Unfortunately, the KPI they didn't measure enough was near accidents. So they only looked at accidents. So things are fine, we didn't have too many accidents. 70% of the near accidents in the US were on BP ground. So if they had just paid attention to the KPI near accidents, which actually they have to report to the regulatory, if the board had paid attention to that, they would of course have paid much more attention to the safety. And the problem is they had simplified things too much. This is now a bit of a counter. They had simplified too much on share price being a proxy of EVA, which is, and so in that sense you shouldn't simplify too much. This is the scoreboard, which is what are we monitoring, and then very important, what's the relationship between the monitoring and the pay. So culture is largely determined by what you pay people for. You can't sort of say you have to do this and then pay for something else. So if you want to have collaboration, you have to pay a little bit more for collaboration. So I think KPIs is very important.
Yeah, just a little bit of a different dimension on this issue. I think I don't have anything to add on the KPIs, but one important dimension that boards have to struggle with when it comes to KPIs, and especially as they are related to performance-related compensation and so on, is like with any rules, this fine balance between flexibility and credibility. So you set basically certain KPIs. So for example, let's say on the performance-related compensation, you set certain of these measures to basically see what you're going to do to your people. But then sometimes you have to make sure that you retain as a board enough flexibility so that if there is an unforeseen circumstance that you can say, okay, you didn't catch that KPI, well, should I penalize the people who worked really hard because something went wrong in a specific unit or something out of their control went bad. So this is one of the hardest things, I think, when it comes to the board operation, because whenever you don't stick to a specific, and this is a kind of a rule, you say you have to meet this KPI, that's a rule. Whenever you have to say, look, it's okay, this is not subject to, this was not subject to your control, we're gonna break it. How often do you do it, and how do you communicate the fact that no, its KPIs are very important, but you do maintain a certain amount of flexibility? So this trade-off between the credibility, which is hard, fast KPIs, you have to meet them. We set, for example, performance compensation based on that. How you actually trade this off with the flexibility, which is very important. Not only in terms of running a corporation, or well, not running, but let's say doing things efficiently, but also in terms of equity or fairness. If you don't maintain some kind of flexibility over how you apply these KPIs, this will sometimes or at some points be seen as unfair. So this balance is at times some of the hardest things that we have to do at the board.
Yeah. I talked earlier about rewards for excellence and the rules. And what Plutarchus said are covered by the rules. In other words, rule number one is you cannot give a reward for excellence, which is a kind of KPI, individual KPIs. You cannot give a reward for excellence, an RFE, to someone for something which is not totally under his control. If you do that and you can make a mistake, then we have the other rule. You stop and you redesign the KPI. That is how you can have flexibility.
Sometimes, and I've seen that, probably you have seen that too, some of the KPIs that you set. So for example, suppose that you set a return goal. A goal on the return on, let's say, employed capital, as we do in one of the companies where I'm in, and something happens. It could be even a financial event. So, for example, an exchange rate fluctuation that changes your return in your home currency. That's definitely beyond the employee's control. So, and it's very hard to basically say, oh, I'm going to have a rule that says whenever it's because of the exchange rate fluctuation that the KPI is broken, I'm going to do it. So this kind of discretionary power to the board, I think, is important, but it's always hard to see how much of that to have without actually making your credibility really go down.
If I can respond to this, I understand what you're saying, but I will tell you how we manage this. We say the business unit manager is responsible for the return. Now, his return can go abysmally because of, let us say, a devaluation, right? But we say, up front, business, is full of uncertainties, full of unexpected events. And you can have good luck and you can have bad luck. So if you have good luck, we will say it's yours. If you have bad luck, then it's also yours. It's clear. And because, we say both sides, it is accepted. It's fair. And this is the reality about the company, the company. How is it responsible because there was a big devaluation? But it suffers. And I think the management should suffer with it.
Possibly you have to buy forward.
Yeah. By the way, there is no perfect compensation system. So every compensation system is wrong. I think what I like in this example is, let's try to make the compensation system fair, clear, and going in the right direction. So I would never say, you know, we have the right, and then the issue is it's not perfect, so can we improve it? And that's the bitching day. So I think the bitching day is very, very important, because the key, people say there is one KPI that is the most important is for motivation is, does my voice matter? Which is when I talk, is somebody listening here? And then, does it matter in terms of, is something happening to it? Which is, you know, somebody comes to me, asks me, etc. So this bitching day looks funny, but it's fundamental for trust building and motivation. So I encourage you to have a bitching day on the European regulators. With the European regulators, not on the European. They're doing the best they can, of course.
My question has to do with the reporting system and innovation, disruptive innovation. So, my line of thought goes as follows. I'm a board member, and we have to make a decision on a new innovative product. So, we have to make a decision on a big amount of capital expenditure. And as a board member, I'm thinking of 3 or 4 things. First is my duty of care, of course. Second is the pressure of the results of the quarter. Then I'm thinking that this product, it seems a little bit risky. And fourth, I'm thinking that I want to keep my job because I love the company. So I will try to minimize errors. What kind of errors? Errors that are reported in the reporting system. And these are errors of commission. If we make a no-go decision for this innovative product, then there will be no problem, because this decision will not report it anywhere. So, nobody can accuse me for being prudent. So my question is, are we doomed only to incremental innovation? And what is the association between the reporting system and the disruptive innovation?
Yeah, I think this is I think this is science now, which is that small startups are more innovative than bigger companies. So there is as the company gets bigger, the bureaucracy takes over, and not even bureaucracy in the bad sense, just the controls, the rules, etc. So that's I think it's an ongoing fight. So most innovation is done by startups, but the startups are done by people who left bigger companies. So this is the issue, which is there is too much talent or too much innovation power that leaves the company because of the unfair rules, because I've been proposing this, and then every year they said, come again, Christos, next year. I'm sure you're going to get it next year. But then Russia collapsed, you know, and you have to understand, come again next year, you know, and in the end you're 73 and you say, I want to do it alone, you know, and I think, so this is why I think companies are now doing contests. So how much is invested in the flunky projects, which is high risk, and that's, I think, a board decision, which is, you know, in the capital allocation, how much do we do on continuous improvement, which is not that cheap. And there, I think, startups are actually very cheap. So now the next idea is we have a corporate venture fund. So we don't just have a contest, but we have actually a fund that invests and that competes with other venture funds. And we sort of realize, you know, after 5 years, how many ideas have come. And I think most people now say, you know, you need to have a contest. So you need to have suggestions. You need to have winners. People innovate not because of the pay, right? Most people, Steve Jobs basically said, you know, the first time I didn't have money in my account, so I never looked at my bank account. And then the first time I looked, I had 125 million, so I didn't have to look again. So people do not innovate because of money, but they need money to innovate. because innovation is expensive. So I think you need to have flunky projects, incremental projects, etc. And I think a key decision is, are we spending enough money in that? So I think a good corporate practice now is I think trying to track that. That actually means that we want to have more than a single business, because if we're one business, I always say, why are the Belgians so good on beer? Because the technology doesn't change, so it's always the same. So then we can stay a business, okay? So for Belgians, innovation means we sell the same beer to another country. But in technology, it changes, so you need to invest. So I think this is sort of now understood, and I think in the future, you're going to have more different business units, which is you're going to put more responsibility and more funding. Yeah, so I think this is, but I think you have been frustrated, I hear.
I would take one more question.
Just to add a little bit, Kostas, on this.
Okay. We'll do.
A question to Mr. van der Heyden. Have you ever made a lecture to people located in the area of Wall Street, or for people living in Frankfurt, to the circle of Ackermann or Achleitner, who both are members of the National Committee of Corporate Governance in Germany? Thank you very much.
We're going to take also a question from the gentleman. We will
respond to all together. So let's take 5 questions, and then we each respond one.
Hello, thank you very much for your speeches. Being the economic advisor of a company that has undergone privatization during the last year, I would like to ask the professor to give us the key elements that he thinks would apply to this kind of company in order to go to an effective corporate governance.
Which type of company?
Well, since we are recording, I would prefer to discuss it at the cocktail. Thank you.
Recently privatized.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Petropoulos presented a very nice journey, let's say, towards corporate governance, and Mr. van der Heyden said that especially SMEs need a board of directors not to walk alone. And I'm sure maybe other people here felt business-wise being alone. So from the things that have been presented today, after realization and before reaching the point that the company is ready to have a board with external directors and more voices, what do you consider the first steps to be done? Rewarding system, the pitching days, the different KPIs? This is my question. Thank you very much.
Do we have any other question?
Yes, please. That's the last one, and then we can wrap up.
Thank you. My question is, what do you make of the practice of many corporations, including some major ones, to appoint the same person as chairman and CEO?
Would you like to start first? Yes, we go, and so that we can wrap it up a little bit.
I wanted to say something to the previous question, because as was mentioned earlier, there's a very long and very, I would say, important academic literature that is showing that in the most vibrant of economies, so US and maybe some other ones, it's the innovation and growth and productivity growth is actually coming from young companies, young growing companies, and also from mature companies that are doing these youngish things. So in addition to putting, of course, a lot of emphasis on the internal enabling environment, which is corporate governance and so on, I think that it's even more important to have to put a lot of emphasis on the external enabling environment that will allow these young companies to enter, to start existing and flourish, and also, of course, for the ones that don't, to exit and go their own way. On the other questions that, I mean, I will leave it to my distinguished fellow panelists here, but on the issue of the chairman and CEO, I think that that was asked. From my own experience, and I've seen both, I think that both types of leadership are possible, and they could work. From my own experience, it's much more natural for the type that separates the two roles to work. So I cannot say that I haven't been in boards where those two were combined in one individual that didn't function well. But I certainly would say that I have a preference for the other one, and I've seen that work really well in different types of companies, not just listed, not just regulated.
Thank you.
First, on the question of the regulators, I think we're now, with our governance program, we've actually put free or fellowships for regulators. So we're trying to bring regulators into the program so that we don't tell them what they should be doing, but we actually put them together with people from the industry. And when we have done this, we haven't done that enough, but when we have done this, the regulators came out and said, wow, I didn't know that, you know, I learned a lot. So I would say we need to have a better dialogue. First, not immediately a bitching session, but actually mutual understanding. So I actually believe, rather than me telling them what to do, which I might fall into, I think it's better to bring them together and have a forum where you have owners and regulators and board members and senior executives. So I think this is what we're doing, and I think it's very useful. And I think on both sides, we have, for example, courses where we might have 30 directors. So we don't need to have 30 regulators, because it's few regulators to many businesses. So if you have 2 or 3 regulators, that's enough because they're part of the context, they're part of the environment. And the key thing they say, the regulators, is we can do more if people came to us, but they're coming to us, they're avoiding us, and they're coming to us too late. I'm not referring to Greece, which I don't know enough, but in other countries, basically they don't engage us enough. We can help them, but we need to have a dialogue. So this is, I think, on the question of the regulators. On the chair and CEO, I think I already answered it, which is form should support the spirit, and the combined role doesn't necessarily support the spirit. So in governance, you have, people have enormously strong beliefs. Most countries think their governance system is the best. They either think our governance system is rotten or it's the best. So it can't be the best in every country. The environment matters. And I would say on the separation, I prefer separation. But if separation means that they're fighting each other, then it's better to have a single person. So it's always form. Form has to support spirit. And then, yes, choice of environment is very, very important. I think there is good news, which is there's a lot of variability, but environment is very, very important. If you're not in Silicon Valley, you're missing something. So which environment are you in? Which sector are you in? The choice of sector is extremely important, even though there's huge variability in the sector. And then the final question I will answer is the first step. What is the first step? I would say have a private board. Don't immediately go into formal. Have a private board, which is people that have right values, people you trust, and outsiders who advise you. Most technology firms miss out because they don't have good enough going to market. They don't have marketing people. So, you know, if you have people in retail, bring them in, if you're a technologist, and these are people who come from the private board. So practice the board before you appoint a formal board would be my advice. And I think never walk alone, because entrepreneurs are typically very lonely, and they only talk to people who already are convinced. So it's like, you know, Catholics talking to each other that Catholics is the best religion and everybody else is wrong. So then it's time to have a private board, appoint a Buddhist, appoint a Protestant, you know, and see, is there something else, and should we use some of these ideas to go to the next planet or the higher level? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Petropoulos.
I would like to respond to the question, how do you start the journey? I'll tell you how we started the journey. Two things. First of all, the top guy must have commitment. If you don't have commitment from the top guy in taking that journey, it will not happen. And it has to be very strong. And the second thing that we did that turned out to be very good for us, we involved our people, our employees. We involved them. We designed the system together. So these are the two things that, from my experience, which I want to share. On the chairman and CEO question, I have to disagree with my friend Ludo here, that if you have two, they should not be fighting each other. I think that if they are not fighting each other, you don't need them both. You need conflict, and you know, the most ancient conflict on this planet is the conflict between the short term and the long term. Have you ever thought of that? These two mentalities, the long-term and the short-term mentality, they are in constant conflict. May I just quote from Greek mythology? Do you know that Harmony was the daughter of Ares, the god of war, the short-term solution, and Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, the long-term solution? Harmony was the result of the union of these two, this huge conflict. And I have found this to be very true. You need the guy who is the innovator, who always asks why about everything, who is never satisfied with what is, and always wants to go to what could be, but you need this guy to innovate, to move forward. But at the same time, if you have only this type of guy in your company, it will go bankrupt, I can assure you. Because somebody has to look at the now, the here, the ground, the detail, the risks. The guy, the first guy, he loves risk. He loves it, he thrives. He thrives in change, he loves risk. You have to have somebody who is very much afraid, against risk. And you must have these two. You know, the only place where there is no conflict is the cemetery. So my view is you should not try to avoid conflict. You should learn how to manage it.
I will say Mr. Petropoulos must be an academic, because he disagrees even when we don't disagree, you know. I think, or he must be Greek, you know, like let's have dialectic, or let's have dialogue, you know, let's have dialogue. I would say, when I said you could have a CEO and chair being the same person, of course, on the condition that you have a lot of conflict with other people, a lot of dialogue with other people. So it's not that all the conflict should be between the CEO and the chair. So in that sense, it's again the system that matters, and not, is this, you know, one role or two roles. The real question is, how many conversations do we have? And Asian governance, I would agree with you, Asian governance is poor because the culture is one of harmony. So basically everybody agrees. In Japan you agree, in Singapore you agree. So there is no added value. It's called approval boards. And in some of these Asian countries, even if you ask a question, you will not be renewed as a director because you're a troublemaker. Of course, that's why you don't have great governance ideas from Asia, because they're all so harmonious. So we agree more than, but you should join academia, you know, because you will find disagreements. And or, you know, what's a you must be a philosopher. What's a chair? Is this a chair? You know, let's have a dialogue.
Well, thank you very much for this, you know, enlightening dialogue, and we will move on.